Now we're starting the plenary session. Again, you can speak any language you want. Вы можете говорить по-русски, можете говорить на украинском мове. В Казахстане сегодня была, кому как удобно. Мы хотели начать такую пленарную дискуссию. У нас есть несколько заявленных спикеров. Из тех, которых мы сегодня слышали, наши друзья из Украины, Николай Карабинович, Evheniia Moliar, Bart, наш сокуратор тоже здесь. И также мы пригласили специальных гостей, которые будут говорить, обсуждать определенную тему. Это жазғы, казахстанский историк, аналитик, академик. Зарина Мукарова, она социальный антрополог, исследовательница. И Зарина только что закончила диссертацию, очень интересную про казахов-репатриантов, которые приезжают из Китая и Монголии. И было бы интересно послушать, какое у них отношение к постсоветскому, может, у них вообще этого нету, потому что они приехали, они никогда не жили в Советском Союзе, они приехали в независимый Казахстан, и, возможно, у них даже нет этого аппарата понятия постсоветского. У нас есть наш родной поэт, двуязычный, очень деколониальный поэт Амар Сембин, который пишет стихи на казахском и русском, смешивая оба этих языка, прекрасной современной поэзии именно деколониальной. И как бы мы задаемся вопросом, в общем, что значит постсоветский, куда мы идем отсюда, можно ли придумать новое слово для этой реальности, в которой мы живем. Мы сегодня много говорили про войну, про разные войны, мы также говорили про то, что происходит в нашем регионе, поэтому как бы, это первая такая дискуссия, где мы можем открыто об этом поговорить. Сначала хотелось бы услышать от наших спикеров около 5 минут интервенции, потом каждый, кто хочет, может просто поднять руку и участвовать в этой дискуссии, что вы думаете, может быть, не согласны с чем-то, или у вас есть какие-то вопросы. Вот. Ну, какой язык удобнее, English, Russian? Каждый может быть как захочет.
Если можно спросить, у нас как бы Bart есть переводчик, но если можно, на английском, если невозможно, то...
So the question is, what is post-Soviet and where do we go from here? Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll start. I wasn't expected to come here. I actually learned it yesterday or today. Later yesterday. I'm very happy to be here. Very happy for Tselinnyyu to invite me, and of course Diana and mine and Nikolay. My name is Kadan. I'm a historian, political scientist from Kazakhstan. I think before we start talking about what is the perception, identities related to post-Soviet, I think we should even discuss a lot about the term post-Soviet. Should we use it? Are we overusing it? Just recently, I think just a couple of days ago, the AP style book, Associated Press style book, which usually is a good guide for the terminologies used in journalism and media and on all other fields, considering what could be the proportion, why they should be avoided, and so on. So, should we call somebody a female artist or woman artist and so on. So AP Right is quite an important work on that for journalists and media. I worked in media for some years. And there was a recent recommendation that for the 14 independent states, which had been part of the Soviet Union, the overuse of the term former Soviet republics is not pleasant, is not justified. And unless you talk about specific aspects, unless you compare about certain institutions which they have or a certain comparative historical part, you should not use the former Soviet Union. And so that was the recommendation with the examples that, as I said, unless there are specific aspects, unless you compare certain institutional, administrative and other units which they inherited from the Soviet period, this is not a very good term. And the justification is very simple. Nobody should be called by their former, nobody should be called by their former husbands, boyfriends, girlfriends, partners, and so on. And the idea is that when you compare former, you go from one field, which was they were subject of an independent subject of another field. Now you're cross-referencing it, and so unless, for example, I don't know, a married person you compare with an unmarried person, and so on. So that's something which should be avoidable, and very unlikely many people not very eager that this is a good justification. And there have been some debate, even I got involved, and I got involved with people I know and I love and so on, but that's obviously a very, very sensitive topic. And as a historian, I also could say that when we talk about former, especially when we talk about the former Soviet, I call this, like this is bывшие советские республики, or even when it comes to post-Soviet or even post-communist, the former Soviet and post-Soviet, in my opinion, and in many other people's opinion as well, it's a term which lingered for too long. 30 years, more than 30 years, when in different millennia we still continue calling it. And when you would look back historically, you would rarely see that something continued that long. Like, I'm also, as a historian, I studied Ottoman history, so I studied Bulgaria, Greece, Macedonia, lots of other countries becoming independent states, and nobody used the former Soviet province of Greece, and, well, former Ottoman province of Greece, the former Ottoman province of Palestine, Bulgaria, Serbia, and so on. And so even when we go to, somebody would say that was a long time ago, 100 years ago, now we talk about something which is 30 years old only, but again, when you would look back, you would see that even after the, for example, independence of Greece, after 30 years, you wouldn't see that when, that's also valid for many other things. And even today, when we cannot compare that, if I would ask you, when was the last time when some politics related to Slovenia, Croatia, joining European Union, Schengen, and so on, but they would be constantly, persistently called former Yugoslav Republic of Croatia, former Yugoslav Republic of this and that. That's something unimaginable when Macedonia, for gain, colonial, ideological, and other senses, for some time was officially called former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Now it's called North Macedonia. Even they said that we shouldn't be called, like, no other country calls that way. That's something unimaginable. They fought for other reasons, and now they're justifiably, by some, not justifiably by them, because they should be called Macedonia. We want to be called Macedonia. There's no other country called Macedonia. We should be. So that's something which did not persist for any other thing, except the former Soviet. We already forgot former communist. Nobody calls the former communist state or country of, for example, Poland. When was the last time you heard of the former communist? Nobody calls that way. Nothing is called that way. Only former Soviet states, which they persistently call them a republic, and republic is again cross-dimensional. We were a republic when we were not independent. Now we should be just called Kazakhstan. And so no self-respected country calls itself a republic. Unless you've been a monarchy and you switch to a republic, then for a decade or two, like in France or in Turkey, you could call yourself a republic, but otherwise it should not, it should stop. It continues and goes on, and that's something I think we should do. Something about it, and we should understand ourselves why, because sometimes, as I said, people whom I know, people in academia, in on-media field continue using that, and that's something we don't use for other countries. Right? There was Czechoslovakia, it split, became now Czechia and Slovakia, but nobody calls them former Czechoslovak republics. I never heard.
But what about France or British Empire, or how do they call themselves? This
They were
formation of former British colonies?
British Raj, they were called the British Raj. Nobody called this the British Raj, former British Raj Republic of India or Pakistan and so on. It's only valid for it. Of course, the one thing is that British Raj was not called for long. That would be called an insult. They fought a war. They fought war amongst themselves, in order not to be called that way. But when it comes to us, so people would say that, okay, this is commercial, there's no other alternatives, and so if there's no other alternatives, just call them quite specifically, call them Kazakhstan, call them their regional things. There are Baltic states, for example, there are states in the Caucasus, there are states in Central Asia, but it doesn't go that way. And the weird thing is that, and I think I'll finish on here, is that the AP style book said that there are 14 states which have been part of the Soviet Union, which sometimes unjustifiably called the former Soviet republics. They don't want to be called that way. And obviously everybody would say, well, why 14? Where is the 15th? But we all know that what is called the former Soviet is not valid for Russia. So they have that somehow. But nobody calls that, oh, бывшая Советская Республика Россия. I don't know whether you heard it or not, right? I hear weird things, lots of things, right? But I've never heard about it. I visited the former Soviet Republic of Russia. Nobody says that. And we all know that the Soviet past and Soviet ideology and lots of other things are connected to that. So that's something which should be avoided. And I try to avoid myself. I avoid myself. I try to tell other people to avoid and why it shouldn't be a good thing. How also it plays well for some ideological, neo-colonial expansionists and other policies. Because whenever somebody would say the former, if you would hear in 30s, maybe today, somebody would say the former Soviet, some former Ottoman province of Sham, which is the Kazakh part of Syria, right? You would think that somebody is talking about some imperialist thing now. Neo-colonial, neo-Ottoman thing. Otherwise, why somebody would call Syria former Soviet province, former Ottoman province of Syria, right? Well, it was not called Syria, it was called Sham, for example. And so you would say that, okay, there's some ideological things going on. But when it comes to former Soviet, people say that, governments say that, ministries of foreign affairs, and I'm not talking about some other countries saying that, I'm talking about the countries which they use themselves. We use it. Our politicians, our journalists use it. We should avoid using it. We could not control sometimes, which other people say, we definitely control what we do. And if we don't like, we are independent states as being a reference to dependent administrative unit of the Soviet Union, should be insulting, should be avoided. And so I think I'll finish here on this terminology part. I would like to listen to what you would say. Thank you.
Thank you. Nikolay spoke about post-Yugoslavia.
Yeah, actually it was a great example because Macedonia and the whole struggle to become a new name country.
It only happens with countries which were dependent, and Macedonia is a problematic place because Macedonian language was not recognized, because Bulgarians said it's a dialect of Bulgarian. Greece didn't say you should be called Macedonia because it's our historical Greece. It's a former Yugoslav state and so on. Yeah. So that's what, it never happens to other countries. Somebody calls United States former British colonies, 13 former British colonies of now known as the United. Nobody calls that way. So it's our task that we should not let that happen, or be aware, conscious, because it doesn't happen to others, it happened to us. Those who were colonized, those historically had been subjugated, and so that's a good story. Thank you.
Yeah, back to Macedonia, I think it also somehow slows the process I don't know how to call it, of Euro integration, or the sort of, it stops all the processes in the country, all the negotiation around the name. So we see
how can in Ukraine do you call, does it call post-Soviet?
No, from my experience, like being in Ukraine and hearing that in Ukraine, it's very rarely happened. It's supposed to be mainly about other states, but I don't know, like your
In
experience.
other states, we're not happy. You're being called by Ukrainians.
It wasn't present that much.
Yeah, it's not often, and it's absolutely nobody used the term post-imperial in Ukraine, for example. In the case when, for example, in Slovak region started the decommunization process and started to rename the toponyms in the city, they banned a Soviet era name and replaced for imperialist period name, Slovak-Skopishesky, etc. And now they forced to rename it again for several years.
What about new names of the streets?
Now it's partly occupied by Russians, so it's impossible to rename something there.
Maybe there is object to name. What's the object of referring not to Soviet past, not to imperial past?
Yes, now it's a tendency to rename new names dedicated to new Ukrainian heroes because too many people died.
The other example is in Crimea, and because it was a lot of Crimean Tatars names or places, and I heard about this new sort of law, or not law, to give back to these places the original Crimean Tatar name.
It's not the law, but like
It's like
idea
initiative,
to discuss it.
but it was like on the state level.
So I have a take on the whole post-Soviet discourse thing. I think it somehow probably has something to do with the whole Cold War enemy-to-enemy discourse. So that's why, and we know that war, even Cold War, it kind of simplifies everything. So at this point, I feel like as Americans, mostly on a political level, like let's say on the news or on the media, they refer to Soviet Union, like the whole Soviet Union, no matter like which republic exactly, they refer to that as Soviet Russia. And that's why basically it was really hard for them to understand what part of Soviet Russia they're exactly talking about. So I feel like this might be the crucial point where they, like the whole international discourse of post-Soviet literally comes from that point. Because Soviet Russia goes to post-Soviet Russia, and then post-Soviet Russia might be like some different countries apart from Russia, and then that's why like they actually refer to it as post-Soviet. So I feel like the main point of that might be the Cold War discourse, which like simplifies anything, and that's why they just refer to all the other countries as like, okay, it's just like post-Soviet Russia.
I think it's very precise that in the survey this has been Manuel Wallerstein who made the world systems, and he speaks about the bipolar world order.
Yeah.
Where you have to know there's also the non-aligned countries that now become the global south, and is actually having the initiative in a certain way. But I think if you look in retrospect, but also in prospect, I think there's much more symmetry to both sides than was granted at that moment. For example, both of these systems, they both promise their people a good life. They say, we take care, we take care well. They both do that. And we call this social democracy in Western Europe. And it was called different, but in a certain way the basics was quite comparable. I think also that both of these systems, they were already prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union or prior to the fall of the wall, they were in a certain way disintegrated. They had ethos to start with, and then they slowly became more and more hanging into things. And in a certain way, you can say think that the changes are there because both systems have lost their kind of impulse. And I think in the same way, and that's maybe a kind of way forward, it might be more interesting to think about any space, because I think that's the reality of what happened when this kind of bipolar world order collapsed. You go to a multipolar world by effect, but you also go, I think, into a kind of new global situation in which there is again more symmetry than the specification, which is to the advantage, I think, for some of the old powers, both the US in a certain way and Russia. You know, that, for example, oligarchs. You know, and we call them billionaires in the United States. We call them highballs in Korea. But actually, I mean, it's a system that has been imported. You know, when the Soviet Union imploded, we didn't do a Marshall Plan from the West. No, we sent them to Chicago School. You know, so in a certain way, there's, I think, a lot of symmetry that's happening. It's also, I think, and that's perhaps why this phase in which we could make this mistake is ending. It's, I think, a time of cynicism, pragmatism. On both sides, you know, everyone not thinking too strategically, not thinking really beyond. And I think also a time when you think, for example, that the militaries might become less important. That's over now also. But also, I think a time when you get some kind of relocalization. A relocalization that might happen, you can say, in a certain way that decolonization started then. You know, that kind of, you start to be able, also Western Europe again. Like Western Europe, it was not part of the free world. We just have a more sophisticated system of colonization because we self-colonized. You know, it's really, I mean, you can, you know, we were looking, America was the measure of everything. If I speak in terms of art, you could only be in seventh heaven as an artist if you were what David Hammons calls male, pale, and Yale. If you were a white male artist from New York. In the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, which was one of the leading museums in Europe at that moment, in the 60s and 70s, there was only white male New York American artists hanging in the central space. So there was this kind of, even there was, I think, more symmetry than there is now, and also Europe starts to relocalize. At the moment this thing falls apart.
Yeah, but at the same time, kind of no one ever, let's say, like referred to France as, okay, Western Europe, right? Because like France is France, but like, let's say Kazakhstan or like Estonia, they're just referred as post-Soviet mostly.
No, I don't think it's true. I think Estonia is way beyond that. They're the Baltics.
Yeah.
And I think that France, I mean, we would see ourselves as Western Europe now. The European community is a real kind of localization. I simply think that didn't happen in Central Asia yet. Some kind of interesting way to say we are here. You know, because the localization that happened, it might have happened for the better, in the sense of, in a certain way, decolonizing or like becoming aware of, again, of where you are. It happened in different ways, different places. In a lot of places, it was a renationalization. Like, or a kind of, it was turned into a new power game. China did a very specific thing. It said, we are going to do that. But also here in Kazakhstan, there was this kind of specifics. They both let this happen, but also let it not happen. By continuing the system. The Baltics are beyond it. And France is Western Europe. Certainly now that the British are out, we're together.
So Western Europe and Balkans, they were all more located to the Europe, and this is all Europe-centric politics that has been giving democracy, way of living to the countries, and Central Asia, in the contrary, has not been given any freedom of speech. So, for example, here in Kazakhstan, especially in Almaty, we have these discourses and dialogues. And in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, it's of course less, and in Tajikistan, we cannot say anything about that. So I'm so nervous. But yeah, I think this is why we are not ahead of this post-Soviet term still, because we haven't been given any freedom. In the contrary to, for example, Balkans. I mean, the freedom of speech or of like, we have been colonized during the Soviet Union, and the whole politics and the regime is based on several essentialistic characteristics. So you have been given characteristics of Uzbek people, you will be Ukrainian, you will have this authentic style of wearing, and you will have this and this like. Yeah.
Perhaps you have less of a kind of sense of qualified localization. If not all the people go together and all the complexities are taken in. If you have a country that again makes kind of a power structure of the kind of national identity.
Yeah.
Maybe that's so, yeah, maybe so.
Я попробую еще раз на русском сказать. То, что Балканы и Литва, Латвия, Эстония, эти страны, они более расположены в западном мире, и поэтому там больше как бы свободы слова, мы можем больше рассуждать, мы получаем меньше пропаганды, у нас есть больше СМИ, доступных на разных языках, не только на русском языке, не только на английском языке, и у нас есть как бы вариативность мнений, которой нет в Центральной Азии, которой нет в Кыргызстане, тем более нет в Таджикистане. И поэтому мы очень редко способны говорить, как бы out of the discourse, мы не можем сказать то, что мы казахстанцы, и мы поэтому привыкли использовать вот этот термин постсоветское, потому что у нас как бы нет другого опыта. Вот, примерно то, что я хочу сказать. И то, что Советский Союз, он, в отличие от других колоний, он был построен как раз на этом принципе дружбы народа, и такие как бы базовые социалистские характеристики, которых выделяли разные народы, да, то, что вот так выглядят примерно украинцы, вот так выглядят казахи, вот так вот. Ну, вот каждому народу дали свои какие-то элементы ключевые, там герб, язык и другое, то, что может как-то их определять. Из-за этого у нас как бы нет обратного представления о том, вот, то есть это не такой как бы прямой, да, метод коммуникации, это обратный метод коммуникации, который сложнее распознать.
Извините, можно комментарий? Я продолжу на русском, если позволите, просто чтобы корректно передать некоторые вещи. Я не знаю терминологию на английском и боюсь создать путаницу. Я хотел бы проблематизировать этот термин постсоветское, хотя покажется, что я пытаюсь его отстаивать. Да, я практикующий журналист, да, и я тот самый человек, который использует слово постсоветские страны, делаю это вполне осознанно, и, собственно, жаль, вступил в очень большой спор с нашим общим другом и коллегой.
Там еще former-Soviet, не постсоветское.
Да, то есть я об этом скажу. То есть мы часто мыслим вот эту приставку советская, да, как действительно принадлежность культурную, эмоциональную, экзистенциальную, да, к тому региону, от которого мы пытаемся эмансипироваться. В то же время мне, как социальному исследователю, не очень понятно, как можно преодолеть это слово «советское», учитывая, что мы не понимаем, как называть вот то образование, да, назовем его государственным, условно государственным образованием, с экономической точки зрения. Да, то есть, когда ты читаешь работы исследователей, с правого фланга люди говорят, что это социализм, с левого фланга люди говорят, что это реально существующий социализм, который мало чего общего имеет с базовыми социалистическими постулатами, в смысле с социалистической теорией, да, 18, 19 и 20 веков. То есть это какой-то специфический транзитный тип экономики, да, который кажется важным мне, как исследователю и журналисту, схватить. Почему? Мы находимся в регионе, который, простите, что я называю это регионом, да, это не попытка, опять же, экзистенциально сплотить Да, это просто некоторая территориальная географическая данность, которая объединена структурными вещами, железнодорожными сетями, энерголиниями, какой-то инфраструктурой, да, складской в том числе, я не знаю, различными трубами водопередачи и так далее. То есть нас связывает действительно очень много. То, что мы после распада Советского Союза провели национальные границы, не отменяет того, что эта инфраструктура остается. Да? Когда мы говорим об эмансипации, о преодолении советского состояния, мы исключаем структурную часть этого вопроса. Да, мы не за 30 лет не выстроили какой-то альтернативной инфраструктуры, да, во многом за счет существования того неолиберального порядка, в котором мы находимся. Мы, как страна, до сих пор существуем в логике эксплуатации, во-первых, той инфраструктуры, да, и той ресурсной направленности экономики, которая выстраивалась в позднесоветский период. Да, и постсоветское в этом смысле, да, это слово, которое пытается схватить вот это очень сложное состояние стран, находящихся в очень сложном транзите. Да, простого выхода из этого нет. То есть мы распались, мы стали независимыми государствами, но мы не обладаем полной степенью независимости как таковой. Более того, не знаю, то, что существует сегодня, да, и мы спорим об этом на самом деле, очень сложно назвать таким постимперским состоянием, да, в смысле постколониальным. Мы не освободились, мы находимся между многих перекрестных процессов колонизации, да, и региональной, и глобальной. Мы плоть от плоти этой системы, наши элиты согласились с тем, что мы осознанно считаем себя колонией, мы позволяем себя эксплуатировать, мы устраиваем экономику таким образом. Да? И в этом смысле мне кажется, что вот этот термин постсоветский, да, он схватывает все противоречия, да, все наше напряжение, он выглядит отвратительно и уродливо, но он передает вот то самое необходимое состояние, с которым мы сталкиваемся. Да? И когда мы его используем, мне кажется, было бы неплохо иметь в виду всю эту противоречивость, да, и это слово, оно подчеркивает наше общее состояние фрустрации от этого состояния и желание его преодолеть.
Можно я коротко скажу? Я продолжу на английском, чтобы развиваться. I'll speak in English. Okay. As I was mentioning, the former Soviet republics and the post-Soviet at a little different level. I accept and I agree with that. But of course, the post-Soviet is not without any or many problems as well. And as a researcher, it is very difficult to find the context where, when you say post-Soviet, that would be valid for everybody. Starting from Afghanistan and Kazakhstan, and also including Estonia and other countries. So, whenever people talk about post-Soviet, if you say the post-Soviet countries, whatever, inflation rates or unemployment rate, other rates, they never put all post-Soviet. So once they don't put all post-Soviet, that's a selected post-Soviet, that's become a little problematic. I would be, so when we talk about post-Soviet problems, issues, and so on, for example, countries like Lithuania, the infrastructure, economics, lots of other things are totally different now than we have, for example, in Kurdistan. And I'm comparing countries of relatively small size, and even that's a little bit problematic. So either we generalize or we meet certain countries, and that becomes also a little problematic. And so whenever we say, for example, whenever we say West, the Balkans, and so on, there's always certain countries which get out of that. So I think that also sometimes creates an idea. Sometimes you also see statistics, for example, crime rate in certain countries, or suicide rate, for example. I'm interested in suicide, and sometimes I check statistics recurrently, and there is suicide statistics, and some might say that, okay, they're not all post-Soviet states, but the article says post-Soviet countries, so at least they would say some post-Soviet countries, and so that would be justification, and over time it becomes very, very problematic. I mean, I mentioned about being close to Europe and some, but when we think Belarus and Lithuania, they're the same distance from Amsterdam probably, but we talk about totally different systems. So again, I think it would be better to justify with that, avoid whenever possible, unless you really comprise all, and that's now, as you said, infrastructure, lots of financial education system, lots of other things becomes more and more problematic. And talk about maybe, I don't know, some other ways, or maybe specific ways that would be put. It always leads to generalization. Whenever someone in European countries or Western countries or Asian countries, it always leads to generalization. This is part of it. That's also is I would say that the post-Soviet lingers with us much longer than, for example, post-Soviet communist for some other countries, for example, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and so on. So somehow for us it's a bit too long, and it's used in places when it's irrelevant, and it will continue like this. So as I said, even for former Soviet republics, there are cases when it could be justifiable, but that would be specifically said, as I know him well, he's using it, but for many other people it's certain insensitive things and some other generalizations doesn't help in any way.
I have a question for you. Well, of course, the United States still have infrastructure. I mean, so much of Russian money technically is in Latvian banks, and so much of Russian population is still there, but even they don't consider the Soviet. So that's, I think, is there's a big difference there. Mongolia had connections to Soviet, had the infrastructure. Why would that call Mongolia post-socialist or post-Soviet or post-communist?
I think very soon it will come there. So, unfortunately, I also studied Mongolia. I read Mongolian newspapers. I also watch Mongolian news and get very angry all the time. And one of the weird things, especially in connection with war with Ukraine, because the Russian, because of the political dependency, it's basically stuck between Russia and China. There's no other countries it borders, lots of political and other mismanagement. It becomes much more dependent on Russia, and the Russian politics are very, very active. Whatever you would think unimaginable for Kazakhstan, for example, бессмертный полк, for example, or organization officially registered as Russia, LNR, DNR, right? Everything exists. The бессмертный полк, Bart. Yeah, absolutely. And it's done in high schools, and that becomes very, very problematic. So this wasn't something which was not part of the Soviet Union, but the idea they tried to recreate it. For example, they play. Suddenly there was a documentary how Mongolians contributed well in World War II on the side of the Russian army. Yes, they did, and they sent horses, other things, and so on. So there is lots of problems like this, to an extent that the anti-war organization in Mongolia, now they propose to switch to Latin in the word Cyrillic, and it's done by an organization called NOVO. They're also very often beaten by police and get arrested, because many people think that Russia became very, very active, and there was in high schools, there are Russian language high schools in Mongolia, so in some of them they made the whole kind of lectures, people from the embassies. So that is something which became problematic, so it was not something. This is something we also see in the Balkans to some extent, Montenegro, and so on, Bulgaria to some extent, but this is something that's also very active, so this is not something which would not be removed, and now they're worried about that they started recreating historical, the Soviet-Mongolian relations. Now it seems like the big deal. So that's
a strange thing. It's in a certain way that when something stops, it doesn't necessarily succeed. It can also be these moments of kind of restructuring. And we have been speaking earlier Nikolay, just one thing to bring up about the museum in Slovenia, Ljubljana. Actually, Slovenia had been Austro-Hungarian Empire from the 17th century or early on 16th, I think. It was part of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was one of the leaders of the non-aligned countries, which are now, the leading in a certain way transformed into the global south. It was the third part. They were outside of the kind of bipolar order. They were completely free. They were not paralyzed by the order. Well, they were going there before the thing. They could travel.
Yeah.
They were further in contemporary art in Belgium. They were, I can argue over it. But what happened when it fell apart? The Museum of Ljubljana in Slovenia, it developed a collection called Former East, which is only part of, at least in contemporary art terms, they were like way advanced. They had an audiovisual curator in Zagreb in 1970. We didn't have a museum then, So they were way advanced, but at the moment the curtain falls, they reposition themselves as Former East, which they have never been. So you have, in a certain way, it's like looking at how can we move, and perhaps it also gives some kind of sense of comfort.
So
because otherwise you're in a space with no name.
they turned like more conservative than they were.
Well, yeah, I think it's another way. But the other way you mentioned also. But they self-colonized while they had not been colonized. Because one of the great things about Yugoslavia is that it was a real attempt to make a kind of viable state situation. For the better or the worse, it was a really interesting case, and that was not developed. Also, Slovenia before the falling apart had a really very strong civil society, very interesting one. And all of these things, in a certain way, they didn't get momentum. They rather fell back a bit. And that's also what I feel a bit about this kind of post-Soviet self-naming, deciding to democratize it. It means you don't democratize something else. You might democratize Central Asia, but you democratize post-Soviet. That's so it's and perhaps it's comfort. It's also a question of comfort or a question of attitudes, being able to hang in to also the infrastructure. It's a lot of mixture. The attitudes of how you can make a power system work in a state, how you can keep control.
Sorry, yeah, just a quick remark, right? Also the difficulty of tackling the term is the fact that we're talking about completely different discourses meshed together, right? Geopolitical, journalistic, economic, cultural, right, or architectural. So it's all particular to that, but also the fact that what also Evgenia's presentation showed us, right? The difficulty of that in a moment of war ideology, those things can shift very quickly, right? The fact that any kind of resistance that can be just infrastructural, right, can be used again to show as the political or ideological kind of support or presence. So it is both the fact that a remark that we have to put on things when we use the post-Soviet, right? Is it the infrastructure or is it the economic kind of heritage, or that not heritage, but the economic journalism, but also just kind of the organization of different infrastructures one by one, right? Or are we talking about, like, again, how other countries are calling us, and what is also important for us in this conversation? Is it to figure out how to refer to each other in this kind of, again, sorry, calling it a region, right? But some kind of like the conglomerate of historical experiences that were gathered in this vast geographical cultural area, right? Is it about figuring out how we talk with each other, or how we figure out how we refer to this, some commonalities or things that particularities that we want to open up about that time? Or are we talking about basically what we want to change in a Western region. So.
And just to add to your thesis in architectural studies, in academic sphere of architectural studies, instead of post-Soviet, as usually presents the term post-socialist, which include part of German heritage, GDR heritage, and it was such an informal agreement in the academic sphere of architectural studies at the beginning of 2000s.
But that would make socialism reveal a real thing, a real socialism. That wasn't actually.
Yeah.
That was something else. Like we need to invent another term to define what they built, because we call it socialism because we don't have any proper term. But it wasn't socialism. It wasn't communism. It wasn't like some terrorist fucking thing.
Yeah, but at the same time, we do not have any real socialism built in any other country, so we don't know what
Well, I
actually
think Scandinavia kind of close.
I mean, it's social democratic.
Yes. So they're much closer to real socialism that Soviet Union ever was.
True, but it depends on what kind of socialism we actually regard as true socialism.
So we need to apply post-Soviet socialism then to make it. So it's more confusing.
If you want to be precise, that's probably the only way to actually enlarge this term as long as possible to actually refer to the right thing. So that's become
Soviet-like post-socialism.
Fake socialism of the Soviet Union. So.
Press socialism.
Yeah, pretended socialism.
But if you come back to Andre's point, I think it's important that we get away a little bit from geopolitics, because that's something that hopefully is not of big interest in this group. What if we talk about our lived experiences, and maybe we don't use it in everyday language, but I think we all refer to some sort of post-Sovietness in how we experience things, right? I don't know, I had a Polish friend who, who studied Astana, and I told him, but Astana doesn't really have in the center the Soviet, you clearly can see this apartment buildings, they're so Soviet. And he looked at me because he was studying in Koktubin, and I think he said, what do you mean by Soviet buildings? And I said, no, but all these apartment buildings that look like identical, you had them in Poland, and it was not made for living, it was just made for people to sleep in there. Small kitchens, horrible, ugly facade and everything. It's not made for living. And he didn't understand me, and to me that was such a clear instance. It's like, but it is Soviet. And then when you're building a new city, like Astana, or like in Ukraine, in the rebuilt cities, we get rid of it. So, and he couldn't understand me. But that idea of sort of like we constantly go back on an everyday basis. We see these things, even nowadays, like in different parts is very Soviet still, but we don't call it like that. So let's talk about how we experience it in everyday life, and maybe there's something interesting in the fact that we avoid calling it post-Soviet, but we all know that it is somehow post-Soviet, it's hybrid. So maybe Tselinnyyu can speak about the experience of Kazakhs who were never Soviet and then come to post-Soviet Kazakhstan without even staying.
Thank you, Diana. I'm actually very happy to present in these 3-4 days discussions. It's fascinating. I mean, it's really interesting. I actually, following the discussion, listening, and the whole day, and thinking and rethinking, and I'm super happy that I'm a social anthropologist. I don't have to think about theories. I'm very down to earth, empirical thing. So I'm not saying that I'm bad or someone else is doing something better than me. No, I just have my own data, and it's related to everything that is happening, and it's related to everything that we discuss about. But we cannot discuss about geopolitics and infrastructure and everything, which is also super important, without getting real data from real people. That's maybe you can, if you make it very clear to be a bit, as we
a couple of hours ago with Bart, we had just a short, quick discussion that it's interesting and why Kazakhstan is not in interest of anyone else in the world, because everything is actually happening here. That's what I actually found out when I was back from Europe 2 years ago, and I think yes, everything is happening just right here. Everything. It's just open your eyes and just live here. My research was based on a small rural area. I was working with groups of Kazakhs repatriated from Mongolia and from China. They are definitely have no Soviet background, post-socialist or whatever you call it. I mean, how we call it. I also use these words post-socialist or post-Soviet, but I know that this is a problematic, but when it comes to data, when it comes to the real life, it's a little bit different, because Kazakhstan is not only, there are elements, if we could say, or agents of people who do not have Soviet background, let's say like that. They do not speak Russian, and they have a very problematic adaptation here, even if they live here for 30 years, maybe even if they adapted very well. But some of them they simply have no entrance, and they are muted. And how do we come to this problem? I think for me, working with the data for the last 8 years, I think Kantar events was the most crucial probably, because this apparently was important, maybe most important for Almaty, because main arena of the fight was in Almaty apparently, and we could see that we don't know each other, we don't know who we are, we don't hear the voices, and different muted groups. And if we talk about decolonization, we really don't see these people. So Almaty is not only Golden Square where we are right now, it's also the working class, if we call it working class, rural area, people who do not speak Russian, who say or who speak only Kazakh. Even I would love to talk about the language, but I think we have to speak about it. Yeah, I mean, some people already know that. I mean, but it's obvious thing in Kazakhstan, and it's also another thing is problematic things how to call us, either we Kazakhs or Kazakhstanis, because like if we look at Russia, they have the Россияне и русские, but in English language it's the same Russian, but in Kazakhstan we can differ. And what does it mean for us? How do we call each other? Means, do we recognize each other? Do we know what kind of groups we belong? I mean, do we have a face? Only okay, we sit here, all intellectuals, artists, and journalists, and researchers. But what do we really know about that? I'm not claiming that I know. I know only one small thing, but I'm not talking about other muted groups like people with disabled people, queer communities, prostitutes, I mean, sex workers, people in the prisons, all people whose human rights are violated. We just don't hear them. We sit here and talk about geopolitics. I'm not devaluating what we're talking about, but if we come down to earth, it's really also, that's why also I appreciate work with, and discuss this with the journalists, artists, and intellectuals. It's important to talk about it, but I think we really need to think about those, even those places in Almaty city where we don't want to go because there is no good coffee there, for instance, or for instance, yesterday we spoke with one of my friends. She's the filmmaker, she's DOP, and she was interested in working on food. For some, food in Almaty is really kind of classy things because you cannot find it in the city center, like some South, for instance, or or you can find it's like it's.
You don't have a student here.
No, there is everywhere.
You can.
I'm just giving an example. Really, I know it. I'm just giving an example. I'm saying that the something is really. So if we look from different angles, it's different. And about oral, about pandas and oral one, people who repatriate the Kazakh ethnic, people who repatriated from not only from former Soviet countries like Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan, for instance, but also from China, from Mongolia, from Turkey, and from Afghanistan. And they have completely, different. I don't feel comfortable to talk about that right now. I'm sorry. I don't know. I have so many things to say, but it's,
How do they feel this post-Soviet thing? Do they even?
I didn't research this question. I cannot answer. But they have different. Definitely, they don't have Soviet. I mean, there is already distinction between them and us. We call them them. We stigmatize them because they don't speak Russian and they simply cannot find the word. Why? What do? They just find some niches, like economic niches, for instance, just to live in their own parallel world. We don't see them unless they are have privileges to get education in a Western country somewhere and speak English and then adapt in the society somehow in the urban cities. But in the rural areas, it's a completely different way. I know it's uninteresting. I'm sorry.
It's just said, it's very interesting. Just to fortify your argument is that they are underclassed because of this post-Soviet economic structure. I mean, it makes them other or even another that we cannot relate to and feel them as a part of this very complex society.
Yes, from this, you can give this Marxist point of the class theory, but also. I'm sorry, I think I need fresh air. And it's 10 hours of discussions.
It's really hard, but in the end, I think we don't ever get further as a society or as people than some kind of patchwork in which we need to be. I think our joint challenge is to make it as open and qualified as possible. But for that, we both need this kind of large notions, which are fake constructions, and we need as many experiences as we can, which are never complete. So that's, I think, a bit, it's patchwork, you know, it's like we cobble it together, like if you do in a little village, you know, you accommodate. If someone pushes for something, you allow it in. And we should, I think it's really very important, saying we should speak to the kind of, what is called a very different language subaltern, like to all the people who do not have a voice, to all the people that are not visible, because it's much more interesting to include. So I think it's...
Thank you for your comments, and I think it's, I think that why I actually wanted to start from Kantar events, because for us, 2020, it's actually, but from today's discussions, I thought this is the really crack of post-Sovietness. It's really started from this rainbow. It's really crack. It's already started. We just maybe didn't even notice that, or maybe realized it just today because of these discussions, or maybe yesterday, or just started to think about it. But crack already happened. Maybe we have to create new terms for this. Maybe we don't have to do, but we have to deal with these things. And if we really do not, look at us as from different sides to see from what kind of touch works. I mean, to know yourself, to start from ourselves. That, for instance, in Kazakhstan, if you speak about the language, we could say there are 3 groups of Kazakhs. There are 3 groups of people we can divide it into 3 groups. Those who speak only Kazakh language, those who speak only Russian language, and also and bilinguals. But bilinguals are also not equal. I mean, I'm speaking about this all the time, and every time I think, yeah, and even bilinguals, we are not equal to each other. There are those whose first language is Kazakh, and there are those whose first language is Russian, and there are those who speak both languages simultaneously, in the same way, the same level. And this is beyond the ethnic things, ethnic constructions that we are dealing with. The Soviet Stalinist ethnic constructions that we're dealing with. Nationalist or ethnos, nationality or ethnicity or citizenship. What does it mean? With dismantling this, it's another layer of dismantling these things. Because it's, I mean, if we compare with the, maybe it's very rough. I'm not a political scientist, because I apologize if it's very rough and not correct, but I mean, if just we speak in a very brief way, Kazakhstan is a claim it's a multinational, multi-ethnic country, the same as Russia, but in Russia there are places that were merged by, they were subjected by the empire, but different. How did the different ethnic groups appear in Kazakhstan today? We all consist of not only Kazakh ethnicities, right? They were deported, they came as a peasantry or during the Soviet Union, but the reality is we all live in Kazakhstan and we all Kazakh citizens. We can call us Kazakhstanis or Kazakhs, we have to decide it, or whatever, we create new word for that, but we have to think that we all have two passports and we have to deal with these things. But we kind of in a state level, this question is not really discussed, and there is nothing to criticize, and there is nothing to accept. That's why we still have problems with that. That's why we even starting the discussion from different points, we don't understand each other because we don't have something in common, what to criticize and what to accept. We don't have this. Maybe we have to create it ourselves and just, okay, we decided we all will call, I don't know, chairs. I mean, I don't care, it doesn't matter. I'm not for, because we know that there's different focuses how to call each other. But we all live in Kazakhstan right now, and if we come to history, what does it mean Kazakh? Kazakh, it's not the name of the ethnic group. It's a polytonym. It's people who were wandering in the steppes, who were outcasts. There are groups of outcasts, and then there are tribes who joined to these outcast people. And I mean, roughly, I'm sorry, just roughly.
We're not outcasts.
It's the best thing to be.
No, I mean, it's just
the outcast not actually connected with the Russian meaning or the Slavic meaning of Kazakhalites, so they think that they somehow we were not outcasts. How we can be outcasts by Chingizids?
But there were two Chingizids princes who were outcasts. We just didn't want to.
Outcast princes.
Yes,
but they are national outcasts.
Yes, of course. I mean, we know that the history was written by enemies all the time. So we have to be critical to the terms that we have to be critical to the sources because they write like brigands, freebooters, outcasts, or whatever, because they see that someone else is very dirty, he has no house, he's just, I don't know, whatever, and this one is always sitting in his house, doesn't go,
Because you're afraid of their power, eh? I mean, Rustam Kalfin made this marvelous video starting from the Chinese notion of the barbarians of the north. It's because the Chinese were afraid of the energy.
And they didn't, I mean, of course, there is, the enemy is, there's someone who is not me, is always some stranger. And all things is coming from alien. Of course, so we have to understand. So maybe these words like outcast and brigands is a bit rough today, but maybe from that time, for those people who wrote that, it was right things. But we don't know, we cannot come back to that time to really dismantle it. So why did I come to history? I wanted to say, we all here right now, I mean, I'm speaking about Kazakhstanis for the local context, and we have to decide, ourselves. The state didn't help us for 30 years. We really we were officially decolonized in 16th of December. The last Soviet country that left Soviet Union. Maybe it would have been kicked out.
You wanted to stay Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean, there were nobody else who was there. Okay, we left.
Everybody else was an outcast. We stayed where we are, right?
Someone else would stay and we would stay. But yeah, so we were officially decolonized, but we had to decolonize our mind, deciding ourselves. But state didn't do these things. We can't blame state for doing this or not blame, but we have the reality and we have to do these things. We have lots of things to do. And I think the two waves of Russian migration after the war in Ukraine started, sorry if I didn't say it correct. Yeah, after the war started, so it's also did not, kind of pushed a little bit back the trauma of the contact. And it's not my fault, I think it's the obvious thing. But also, it's also put so much pressure on us to understand, to really understand, to put this question so harshly. So we really have to understand. So identity is the most important question right now because of that. And maybe we could have neglected this question of identity before, but now we really face to this, and we cannot step back from that.
What about new language? Can we speak to Anwar and his new language? How do we create that? Anwar has fantastic poetry in Kazakh Russian. It's the local version of Russian. The one that Nikita said we already paid enough blood and sweat for to sort of hear as a sort of gift. And he creates a very interesting language, so let's hear from the poet.
Спасибо. Я бы сказал, что относительно было начну с того, о чем мы говорили. Мне просто очень понравился момент про то, что про проблематичность постсоветского. И на самом деле я родился в 85 году, и моя сознательная жизнь пришлась на 90-е, началась. И для меня не было никакой такой реальности, да, то есть была какая-то вот такая страна, это уже был независимый Казахстан, такая экономическая, культурная, языковая ситуация в обществе, дома, я учился в казахской школе, я дома говорили по-русски, с бабушкой были по-казахски, с мамой по-русски, такие вещи, конечно, преимущественно в начале, с детства было много казахского, потом стало больше русского. И я хотел сказать, что я сначала интуитивно, а потом сознательно, может быть, я неправильно усвоил уроки истории, да, которые преподавали, может быть, слава Богу. Поэтому я никогда не воспринимал то место, где я живу, как некий осколок чего-то большого. Я всегда воспринимал это как нечто целостное, которое здесь всегда было, и до Советов, и до империи, всегда здесь
Тебя бы уже еще лично заставляли в тетрадке книги.
Наверное, да, или меня спасло, что я прогуливал школу, особенно историю, да, я не любил преподавательницу. Но, в общем, в общем-то, всегда воспринималось как нечто целостное, нормальное, никакой не осколок, ничего великого, это просто место, в котором мы живем. И, соответственно, язык тоже, на котором я говорю и думаю, просто случился со мной как факт, да, то есть я сначала на нем заговорил, а потом я понял, что он называется русский, да, какой-то там. Ну, в смысле, это просто такой факт моей географии, жизни, я никогда не стесняюсь, не сначала говорил, не сначала еще чего-то там говорить на языке, я могу не назвать его русским, если какой-то другой язык. Можно, да, цитируя Асимжата, что можно как-то его переименовать уже здесь.
Урыс?
Да, присвоить, но урысский, то хорошее, или там Кенджи казахский.
Инжимайский.
Да, в общем, вот. И по поводу языка, почему я пишу так, как-то, справедливости ради, надо сказать, что я все-таки пишу в основном по-русски, и там есть какие-то элементы казахского языка, если говорить в процентном соотношении, наверное, там 90/10 примерно. Но это вот эти 10, которые почему-то вот так хотят быть сказаны именно так и никак иначе. Да? То есть это не попытка какого-то намеренного художественного эксперимента, не какое-то сознательное там, типа, я там, экзотизирую свой текст или еще что-то. Это вот неспособность в этом моменте сказать по-другому, просто потому что в тебе есть вот как две разные возможные идентичности, связанные с языком, и они вот как-то вместе там все существуют, ну, вот в таких пропорциях, пока в каких есть. Да? Ну, то есть, как бы, наверное, как-то так, если.
Можно я спрошу тебя по этому поводу? Было несколько лет, когда ты говоришь, что ты больше не пишешь на билингвальном, что ты теперь перешел только на русский, а потом опять вернулся
Я так
к
говорил.
имплементации казахского.
Вы говорил в личной беседе или в каком-то интервью?
Я не помню, мы с тобой просто обсуждали, что вот я тебе кому-то представила, что ты пишешь на двух языках, и ты сказал, нет, я писал раньше, а сейчас у меня только на русском языке, а потом опять.
Возможно, в тот момент так и было. Наверное.
То есть я хотела спросить, почему случился такой
почему я сейчас...
переворотик,
почему я сейчас вернулся?
Переворот, а потом почему вообще сальто? Зачем ты сделал это сальто?
Слушай, я не знаю, вот оно как происходит, так происходит. То есть у меня, я вообще мало как бы, об этом рефлексирую, если я просто пребываю в этом, в каком-то, ну, в смысле, вот я вот так пишу, вот так делаю сегодня, так иначе. Ну, в смысле, я никогда не задумывался, почему. То есть люди, которые со стороны что-то про меня пишут, мне очень интересно всегда это читать, потому что у всех есть свои какие-то представления о том, чем является мой текст. Да, он там, кто-то говорит, что он деколониальный, кто-то говорит, что он политический, кто-то еще кто-то. Дело в том, что я никогда в жизни не воспринимал свой текст как деколониальный или еще какой-то. Не потому, что я не хочу такого быть, просто как бы я вообще об этом не думаю. То есть просто как бы, ну, мне незачем об этом думать, слава богу, что есть академики, теоретики,
Ты же рассказывал как-то, что ты на самом деле не готовишь какой-то текст, ты просто даешь возможность ему выйти. Ну,
это есть такое, как бы...
Да, и может на каком языке оно вышло?
С одной стороны, очень такое романтизированное, конечно, клише про то, что ты там что-то проводишь, что-то пишешь, но это я говорил в связи с тем, что невозможно никогда до конца себе присвоить то, что ты сделал. Потому что, ну, как только ты как будто бы понял, как это делать, как будто ты знаешь, что произошло и что ты написал, тут же это становится как бы ложью, потому что и ты в какой-то момент понимаешь, ну ладно, может быть, это не совсем я, или я с чьей-то помощью, или кто-то с моей помощью. Ну, в смысле, это как бы такая очень штука непонятная, поэтому я могу иногда в эту паузу удариться, да. Ченнелинг something, да. Ну, в смысле...
Мне очень нравится.
Поэтому просто оно происходит, и классно.
А мне вот напишем, что приходит, так выливается.
Я просто...
Что приходит и выливается.
Нет,
мы так и напишем. Деколониальный выливается.
Разве это не объяснение тому, что, допустим, какие-то у тебя вот оно начинает, ну, там, не знаю, вдохновение или как ты это называешь, ну, как мы это называем, кто как называет. Потому что оно просто именно в том, вот ты же сказала, что оно родилось просто, вот оно вот по-другому и не может быть сказано. Вот именно вот так вот оно и пришло. Слово, например,
потому что мы же всегда живем в какой-то одной версии реальности, если оно так вышло, значит, по-другому не будет. Ну, в смысле, как бы, мы не сможем это проверить.
Отличный point.
Да.
Я хотела сказать, что на самом деле у нас запланировано целых еще 3 дня дискуссий, и как раз таки тема языка у нас на среду, да, где будет большая дискуссия, развернутая, тоже с участием как раз коллег. Я думаю, что я бы хотела сказать, что мы действительно сегодня уже провели 10 часов совместных времяпрепровождений, и, к сожалению, нам нужно закончить, так как это пространство так и закрывается. И я бы хотела вас пригласить к нашим дискуссиям в неделю, вторник и среду. Также я знаю, что Диана уже сказала участникам воркшопов относительно задания на понедельник по объекту. Мы обязательно еще публикуем в мейле всем сейчас учеба, но также я бы хотела сказать, что для нас очень важно и ценно, что вы все сегодня пришли сюда, разговаривать с нами и участвовать в разговоре, который я не прерываю, вот, который я хотела бы и приглашаю продолжить. Вот, и, конечно, это очень интересно. Мне кажется, немножко конец курса, потому что мы начали говорить о том, что такое постсоветское. И на самом деле это такой бесконечный большой разговор, и мы еще хотели поговорить о том, где постсоветское, да, то есть в чем, и может быть, мы хотели определить для себя в каком геополитическом как бы, моменте, да, мы находимся, то есть где оно есть сильнее, больше или нет. Но в целом я бы хотела, чтобы мы смогли развить эти дискуссии, и с удовольствием ждем вас в любой день. Все вечерние дискуссии открыты для всех, но также, если у вас есть желание прийти в любой момент днем, пожалуйста. Вот. Спасибо большое.
Днем идет именно на ваш.
Да.
Ну, кстати, где постсоветское. Пожалуйста, приносите свои объекты, мы поговорим, где постсоветское.